Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Klaus Lehrer, for the welcome note. My name is Noah Ha. I will briefly introduce myself and then introduce the panelists of the first panel. We will have 2 talks and presentation and then thereafter a conversation. As I said, my name is Noah Ha. I work as coordinator at the Center for Metropolitan Studies at Technical University Berlin. My research interest is looking at postcolonialism, colonialism, and urban production and urban reproduction. I'm also an active member of the board of the Migrationsrat Berlin, which is an umbrella organization of about 60 migrant self-organization, and as well active in Asian-German context, in particular the association Orientation e.V. So I'm very honored being part and contributing and supporting this conference here because there was a lot of work into there. And now I'm very honored to welcome our first speaker, Nadja Ofuatey-Alazard. She is a diploma journalist and a Black Forest-born production manager, journalist, curator, moderator, and filmmaker who works at the intersection of art, activism, and academy. Since 2010, she is co-directing the critically acclaimed annual Big Zaz, Festival of African and African Diasporic Literatures at the University of Bayreuth. Her recent publications include African Futures and Beyond, Visions in Transition, co-edited in 2017. Then Wie Rassismus aus Wörtern spricht, Kerben, Erben des Kolonialismus im Wissensarchiv Deutsche Sprache, co-edited in 2011. And 200 years later, commemorating the 200-year anniversary of the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade from 1928. In 2016, she produced an event and film series shot in the former 4 German colonies in Africa entitled Remix, Africa in Translation from 2017, which has been licensed by the Federal Center for Civic Education, in German Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung. Nadja recently moved to Berlin to become a co-CEO of the Black Community Empowerment Project Each One, Teach One, EOTO. So please let us welcome her today for the conference and as well in Berlin.
Dear Mnyaka Mboro, dear Christian Kopp and the conference organization team, dear Senator Klaus Lederer, dear presenters and panelists, dear moderators, colleagues from far and near, esteemed ladies and gentlemen. So thank you for having me here and listening. As Noah said, I'm a very recent Berliner and Weddinger, you know. I took a position with EOTO Each One Teach One just 2 weeks ago, and I apologize if my phone rings and my kitchen furniture is being delivered. I will have to quickly dash off and then I will return. So yes, so let me speak about the project that Noah already alluded to, Remix, Africa in Translation. It's an event and film series. Could we have the second slide, please? That we conceptualized in 2015. We raised the financing, the team building followed, and that continued into 2016 when we set off to this adventure. As Noah mentioned, I'm co-director of the Big Zaz Festival of African and African Diasporic Literatures. We've been running that in its 7th year now. In 2016, though, I decided to have an add-on and institutionalize also a change of perspective and location. So as you can see, the first stop of the Remix series was again the festival, Literature Festival in Bayreuth. We then set off to the first stop on the African continent with Togo, then continued on to Cameroon, which is the 3rd stop. So every 6 weeks we took off to another journey. Next we went to Tanzania and ultimately found ourselves in Namibia. Now, the structure of the project is also telling, the way that we conceptualized it. I'm not representing the project alone. It was a huge collaboration. I'm the producer. I wrote the concept. and I worked with a Franco-African director and photographer by the name of Nicolas Grange. Some of you might know his platform, Africa is the Future. So he was the DP, director of photography, and the director of the project. We also had partners. We had co-curators, both Afro-Germans, who had, individually for each country, we had one Afro-German co-curator who had links to that respective territory, former German colony, and we had African co-curators in the respective countries. I'll allude to that a little bit more in depth later. We organized symposia in the capitals of Togo, Cameroon, and Tanzania. We did not hold a symposium in Namibia for production-related and also political reasons. We still hope to do that, to present the film series there and invite all protagonists of the preceding projects there in a huge event. Hopefully that'll come true. Now, as you will see, we will now shortly show the introduction of the film series. So we had, at the end, we had 4 films, each between 30 to 40 minutes long. We will show you the intro, which is short, about 5 minutes, and then you will see, you will get an idea of the interview partners that we spoke to. You will not really hear them, but once you visit the site, I will show you the URL later, then you'll have the opportunity to listen to what was said. So the interview partners, we co-contacted out of the networks of the African co-curators and host institutions, as well as based on our own networks and research. So film ab bitte. Let's have a look at the intro.
Mit der Berliner Afrika-Konferenz von 1884 auf 1885 trat auch das Deutsche Reich dem Kreis der europäischen Kolonialmächte bei. Auf Einladung und unter der Federführung von Reichskanzler Otto von Bismarck verhandelten deren 11 Vertreter über die Aufteilung des afrikanischen Kontinents. Für die vielen Millionen von Afrikanerinnen und Afrikanern und ihre Nachfahren war das, was da ohne ihr Wissen und ohne ihre Beteiligung in der deutschen Hauptstadt entschieden wurde, von weitreichender Bedeutung. Auch für das weitere Verhältnis zwischen Europa und Afrika wurden in Berlin die Weichen gestellt. Nicht nur wurde die afrikanische Bevölkerung durch die Bestimmungen der Berliner Afrika-Konferenz vollständig entrechtet, auch brauchte Europa einen legitimierenden Diskurs, um seine rassistische Kolonialideologie und seinen brutalen Expansionismus in Afrika zu rechtfertigen. So wurde in Berlin erstmals ein gesamteuropäischer Zivilisierungsauftrag gegenüber Afrika formuliert, ein bis heute lebendiger Mythos. Die folgende 30-jährige Gewaltherrschaft der Deutschen in den Gebieten des heutigen Togo, Kamerun, Tansania, Burundi, Ruanda und Namibia endete mit der deutschen Niederlage im Ersten Weltkrieg. In Deutschland blieb diese unbewältigte Kolonialvergangenheit jedoch strukturell wie diskursiv wirkmächtig. Dank der unermüdlichen, jahrzehntelangen Arbeit von Aktivistinnen und Aktivisten aus Zivilgesellschaft und Akademie wurde verhindert, dass dieses Kapitel deutscher Geschichte weiterhin ignoriert, verdrängt und geleugnet werden kann.
Das koloniale Gewaltregime hinterlässt Narben und Spuren. Und dies wirkt bis heute fort für Menschen in Afrika und Menschen der afrikanischen Diaspora. Wie gehen wir mit diesem kollektiven Trauma um? Wir sehen in dem heutigen deutschen Kontext dass die Mehrheitsgesellschaft oder die Dominanzgesellschaft versucht, sich auch an diesen Fragen ranzutrauen. Zum Beispiel in dem umstrittenen Projekt des Berliner Humboldt-Forums oder mit der aktuellen Sonderausstellung im Deutschen Historischen Museum. Oder mit den Fragen um Straßenumbenennung. Menschen auf dem afrikanischen Kontinent setzen sich schon seit geraumer Zeit mit diesen Fragen auseinander. Die Frage, wie mit dem kollektiven Trauma des deutschen Kolonialismus umzugehen ist. Und wir sehen in diesen Filmen, dass es eine Reihe von Strategien gibt. Zum Beispiel, es gibt die der Verdrängung oder Amnesie. Es gibt aber auch die Strategie der Verherrlichung oder eine Art Nostalgie. Und dann gibt es die Strategie der kritischen Auseinandersetzung und Widerstand. Und dies drückt sich aus in der Kunst, es drückt sich aber auch aus in der Wissenschaft und im Aktivismus. Wir sehen, dass es eine kritische Auseinandersetzung gibt mit dem kolonialen Archiv und Oral History bekommt einen größeren Gewicht als Methode, um mit diesen Fragen umzugehen. Welche Rolle spielt Dekolonisierung in einer möglichen kollektiven Heilung? Und was meinen wir überhaupt mit Dekolonisierung? Zu Dekolonisierung gehört das Erinnern, das Aussprechen, das Gedenken und das Überwinden. Dieser Prozess legt den Fokus auf die eigenen Bedürfnisse, das eigene Wissen, die eigene Expertise. Dazu gehört aber auch, dass schwierige oder ambivalente Aspekte unserer eigenen Geschichte selbstkritisch thematisiert werden.
Die Remix-Veranstaltungsreihe startete im Juni 2016 mit dem jährlich an der Universität Bayreuth stattfindenden Afrikanisch- und Afrikanisch-Diasporischen Literaturfestival. Das Projekt begab sich dann in der zweiten Jahreshälfte auf die 4 Reisen in die deutschen Ex-Kolonien auf dem afrikanischen Kontinent. Welche Rolle spielt die koloniale Vergangenheit für die afrikanische Gegenwart? So die zentrale Fragestellung des Projekts, das den Perspektivwechsel hin zu jenen vollzieht, die die koloniale Erfahrung in ihren Ländern erbten und so einen polyphonen Dialograum zwischen afrikanischen Expertinnen und Experten unterschiedlicher Provenienz schafft.
My motivation is obviously deeply rooted in the experience of being Afro-German, and as you're all aware, the current, mounting interest in the colonial history of Germany is something quite recent, and it's obviously the result of constant pushing out of civil society by activists and also the academy, the critical academy. But obviously also growing up as a child of African descent, I had an ongoing discomfort in those spaces that claim ownership of truth, the tellers of master narratives of European superiority, be it museums, schools, the media, churches, etc. That lingering discomfort made me uneasy and made me question the smooth surfaces of those narratives. I was looking at it like a palimpsest and asking myself what and where were the silenced voices, the untold narratives, the unseen presences. I understood very well early on as well that there was a connection between us, Black people of African descent in Germany, and those voices that did not find a listening in European and German spaces. Therefore, this project was conceptualized and developed as a change of perspective, which also means that we as Afro-Europeans consciously took a step back and attempted to simply create spaces of polyphonous dialogues in which we mostly played the role of listeners and co-moderators in conjunction with our African partners. Regarding the title remix, as one term, prominent term in it, as you know, this term comes out of urban DJ culture, where you take existing bits and pieces of sound and create something new, at times something also subversive, and thus also you create a new angle and context for this remix. Again, this is related to the figure of the palimpsest, the layering and the overriding of knowledge. The second Q word, translation, does not mean that we wanted to translate Africa into palatable pieces for German consumption. translation alludes more to the process of dialogue between us as Afro-Europeans, Afro-Germans, and our African partners, as well as it alludes to transgression, for example, in the case of Togo, the transgression of colonial borders. As you know, colonialism, in the case of German Togoland, divided societies that belong together, part of the former German colony of the ex-Togoland lies in current-day Ghana with the Upper Volta region. In that case of Togo, therefore, also our African co-curator was the Ghanaian archaeologist, Dr. Wazi Apo, who specializes in his research on German colonialism in the region. So he transgresses those borders. And there were more transgressions that also in the course of the conference, I'm sure we're going to allude to. And my colleague, Bonaventure, will most likely also speak on that division of Cameroon along colonial borders that is still in effect today. In the case of Togo, our German Togolese co-curator was Nadine Golly, who is a scholar of education studies in that case. So the Afro-German co-curators also sort of production managed the whole thing. What I have to also remark on is obviously this change of perspective is obviously something recent. So there are no definitive conclusions or results that I can present here. It's a work in progress, and for us a first step to consolidate African voices vis-a-vis German and European colonial history. It's a preliminary probing into that. As I said, we organized symposia, one-day symposia in African host institutions in Togo, Cameroon, and Tanzania. And what we could see and hear was that there's a tremendous interest in this form of polyphonic dialogue. This relates both to also addressing the traces and consequences of German colonialism, as well as discussing related issues in history. For example, the enslavement trade, that is one of the preliminary markers we set down already consciously to see, okay, colonialism obviously did not only originate in 1884, there is a history to it, and that was already weakening, of African societies before colonialism formally began. There were also other issues that were very important to the participants of these symposia, and you will get an idea of that if you visit the website and look at the films, especially also relating to the situation of the contemporary arts and activisms there. Now, what our impression was, and that's a preliminary marker again, that in Namibia and Tanzania we found an extremely politicized crowd, where the themes of the theft of human remains in the context of genocide, in the case of Namibia, and in the case of the Maji-Maji War and its predecessors, because there was a lot of resistance also preceding Maji-Maji in Tanzania, are already really on the surface of the political and activistic discourse. Especially in Namibia, while we were there were ongoing negotiations between the German and Namibian governments, excluding, though, for the most part, descendants of the victims of genocide. Both in Namibia and Tanzania, there's also very keen awareness in academic circles, so amongst historians, archaeologists, and anthropologists, on this theme, both general German colonial history as well as the theft of human remains and cultural and sacred objects. And also, especially in Namibia, oral history plays a very important role in these processes of remembering the past, which has been overwritten, and there are so many layers of trauma in Namibia, as you know. and also in terms of voicing and making demands of restitutions and reparation. And in Tanzania, this process is really taking off, as you know, as well as in Burundi. And at the symposium in Dar es Salaam, we also had a guest from Burundi, political scientist. So again, this is the concept of translation and also transgressing these boundaries that have been created through colonialism. In Cameroon, for example, where we held the symposium in Yaoundé, we traveled around, obviously. We went to Douala, we went to Buea, and we did wind up in Yaoundé. In Cameroon, there seemed to be less of that, from our point of view, and I'm looking forward to Bonaventura's input on that. But still, there is a rising consciousness in artistic and activistic circles, and to some extent also in the sciences. From our point of view, especially in the Anglophone Cameroonian Academy, both relating to forced labor, the enslavement trade, and German colonialism. As I said, other themes are forced labor especially, and also a very pronounced rewriting the history of Cameroonian resistance against German colonialism, and the questions of artistic and sacred objects. As an example, the Tangay, who is claimed back by Kumandumbe, who is the founder of Africa Veneer, whom most of you are familiar with, I'm sure. And the Tangay is in a museum in my hometown, Munich. And they are refusing to give it back, and I think they offered him a copy that he would have to pay for. So in Togo, which was our first stop on the African continent, we had the impression that there is no consolidated political or activistic movement yet, and that the memories of colonial German histories are fragmented in various sectors of civil society. So, for example, in the structures of the traditional authorities and collectivities, that memory is quite alive, as well as in few academic circles, but so far there had not been an exchange between researchers from Ghana and Togo, given also the language barrier. But again, there is Ewe, the African language, as an option to communicate, but so far there had not been any formal cooperations. And we hope and we are proud that the symposium, created that space and made that possible. So in many ways we felt and we thought of Togo as a still sleeping beauty, but still there's a rising number of diasporic Togolese who are doing research now. For example, Ohiniko Tofa, who will be speaking or being part of a panel this afternoon, and he's doing his doctoral research on the role of the Norddeutsche Mission, the North German mission, in the colonization of Togo. Thus, I invite you to have a look at the 4 projects on this website, on the website of the Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung. That's the URL. For now, they are only subtitled in German, but an English translation is in the making. So we will gladly inform you via the organizers on when that version will become available. And also, we are very interested in your feedback. Again, come up to me, please, if you're interested. I give you my email address, or I hope the organizers will be happy to establish contact. You can download all films, I think, at some point in November. So make use of them in teaching and in activism, I beg you. You can use them for non-profit purposes, and otherwise just be in touch with us. So I wish you and us and myself an inspiring, informative, and invigorating conference. Thank you very much.
We have some time left to pick 1 or 2 questions from the audience, but before I would like to ask you, as the conference is on Prussian heritage, and so I'm interested, because you just recently moved to Berlin, so I would like to ask you to comment a bit, because you have a more distant view of what's going on here. So what is your evaluation on what's going on? Is there any progress? Is there a lot of, on one hand, you showed us a lot of resistance, but on the other hand, like we're here in the city and dealing with that there is this castle already almost there. And in comparison to other German cities, how do you contextualize the process going on in Berlin?
Well, you know, I really do not want to comment too much on the Humboldt Forum because, again, you know, I was really quite far away. Obviously, I was an interested observant and I have ties into Berlin and friends. I think this is something really that will be, there are other people here present that can speak on this in a very informed manner. I still think, I mean, funny enough, for example, this film series was financed by the Foreign Ministry of Germany. So that for me is a very good sign. Now there is a lot of, also internally, a lot of resistance to that project, you know, having the stamp of the Foreign Ministry, but still and yet I find also, I mean, it's a shame that Humboldt is being built and now it's a question of how to deal with that and how to put it to good use and how to make it a forum of critical discourse, integrating, you know, the voices of the formerly colonized, and I'm not sure to what extent that's going to be the case. Mm-hmm. Then the whole question of research on where these objects, you know, in which context these objects were, you know, made their way to Germany. That is also something that seems to be yet now quite on the forefront. So I still think Berlin is a trendsetter. I mean, there is deep, you know, Bremen is quite active as well, so there's a lot going on. I have the privilege of being an artist in residence there this year for a couple of months, and there, again, they are pushing a lot. Munich is fast asleep. They just renamed the ethnographic museum. Now it's no longer called Ethnographic Collection, now it's called Museum of the Five Continents. But still, the content remains the same. So I still think Berlin is a trendsetter. Now we'll have to live and deal with the Humboldt Forum, but I also find that there is a growing interest or need or, sense of reality check inside the institutions. I mean, they cannot just act in any which way any longer, you know, and ignore these demands, ignore us. So yeah, I'm thrilled to be here and take part in those struggles. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a warm welcome. I mean, it's good to have you here now in Berlin.
Thank you.
I will look around. Are there questions directly to what Nadja was talking about? I don't see any question. There's one question. Yeah, there's a microphone coming.
I just have a quick question. How can we make the research that you talked about that is being done in, for example, Togo or Cameroon or Namibia as well, from those academics who work there, how can we make it more accessible as well in Germany, for example? Because I feel like a lot of times the material that is accessible in German libraries is mostly from German scholars. So do you have ideas on that, or are there any existing cooperations already?
Well, thank you for that question. I mean, obviously, what you can do, I mean, you're talking now about literatures and research that has been translated into German? No. Oh, just make it available. Okay, so if you look at the films, for example, obviously you have the institutional affiliation of those people that have been speaking. You have their names, and you can easily, or more or less easily, research, you know, their lists of publications. We have not put out a document yet summing all that up. Then again, I just took on a position as co-CEO of Each One Teach One, EJOTO, e.V., and one of the projects, the central projects of EJOTO is a library. an African and African diasporic library. That is being digitalized and made available. For now, you could only visit and do research there on site. We are moving into new spaces early next year, hopefully in Togo Street. You will find us in the heart of the African Quarter, or Keats, as we or they say here. And so obviously we are also developing structures for an academic network. So that's all going to be built within the next months. So have a look at the website of IOTO, and I'm sure you'll find what you're looking for eventually. Thank you.
If there is one more question, we can take one more question before we welcome the next. Here is one, yes.
Thank you very much, Nadja. I'm Elizabeth, United Nations Fellow for Issues of People of African Descent and member of the Rwandan diaspora. I was interested in the project and would like to know, because Rwanda was kind of left out, so being a former colony, was there a particular reason for not going to Rwanda, or is there also a process of actually highlighting the Rwandan experience? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, if you think along the lines of production, that translates as time and money, basically. So I absolutely wanted to visit Rwanda with the team, but the scope, of the former East African, German East Africa, now I got it, Deutsch Ostafrika. So what we did instead is we invited scholars from Rwanda who took part in the symposium. So once you look at the film, you will see them and hear them. So we were really keenly interested in that. We did not manage to invite someone from Burundi, but at least Rwanda was represented. And that, again, was another of these transgressions that I alluded to before, and that was very, very enriching for this symposium, this exchange. Thank you. Excellent question. Yep.
Thank you, Nadja, for your presentation, for the answers.